This is the Sober Boozers Club podcast.
Welcome everybody to the Sober Boozers Club podcast. My name is Ben Gibbs. I'm an alcoholic and I've been sober since January 2022. In that time, I have been navigating the world of alcohol-free beers, sampling some of the best that the world has to offer. In this podcast, we're going to talk to people from within these circles and find out a little bit about their journey. So you sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome to the now award-winning Sober Boozers Club podcast. That is the first and last time I'm going to say that, I promise you. For Season 2, Episode 1, I'm talking to two guys called Dave who collectively form the Daft About Craft podcast, which is a podcast centering around the world of craft beer. I appeared on their podcast not too long ago and had a darn good time, so I thought we'd do it all over again. How are we both, gentlemen?
We're very well.
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad, thank you.
It's
Good.
nice.
I sent your lying, Dave B, but we won't go into that too much. This has, for context, we've been trying to arrange this for maybe a month, I'd say, and then just a string of ailments has fallen upon you, and it's been a treacherous time, but we're here now, and that's what we like. So thank you both for coming on to do this. I really wanted to get you on for Episode 1, which is why this podcast is so late in coming out, because we did an episode together on your podcast, and I had a bloody good time. So it's really nice to have you guys here.
It's quite strange being at the opposite end of everything this time. And we're in the hot seat. It's weird, isn't it, Dave?
Just joining without sort of having any prep or necessarily knowing what the questions are going to be, whereas usually, we're setting the tone rather than being on the receiving end.
We're at your mercy this time.
Yeah, I deliberately don't plan anything, which is like a really bad way to do things. But, so far so good, I suppose, until we get to that inevitable episode where it's just me and someone going, I've got nothing to say here.
To be honest, I don't think it's such a bad thing. We have a few things mapped out, but not much. And when it comes to interviews, I never give people a list of questions or anything. And neither do you, Dave. We like to just make it up because you never know where that conversation is going to go to.
Yeah, I much prefer it like that. It's kind of, nothing is off the table. I like that. I need something in my life that feels dangerous. God knows I've got rid of everything else. But speaking of interviewing techniques, how did this all start for you two? Have you always been into beer and then just decided, right, let's get into this? Or how long have you been around the world of beer?
Go on, Dave, you start this one off.
I was probably when you get to sort of 18, 19, I, drank the same beers that everyone would drink to start with, like your Fosters, your Stella, things like that. But then I think it probably speaks to my personality. I always wanted to find different beers. And at that point, going back 20 years, it was sort of European stuff. There wasn't necessarily craft around at that point. So it was more European, your German, your Belgian beers. And I started to explore those a bit. And then after that, sort of not hot on the heels, I suppose, but then it felt like after a little while, then craft beer came along, and I was sort of put onto that by a friend and never looked back really, and that was probably 10, 12 years ago, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a similar sort of story with me. Obviously, when you're at, I was going to say school, not maybe school, but college, university, you get into beers and you drink the usual stuff, and I'd got some older friends and they were drinking this sort of cask ale stuff and I had a bit of that. And I thought, it's all right. But then one day somebody introduced me to, it was a lager from Cloudwater. And I tasted this and it was like this light bulb moment. And everything else that had gone before, it was utter dross. This was a whole new world here. And this beer was fantastic. And ever since then, there was no looking back. Hook, line and sinker, just all into craft beer, and I love it. We both love it, don't we? And we're always looking for the next best thing or something different, something new. But we found out during lockdown that we both like beer. We worked together. We didn't know that each other liked beer, but we found this out during lockdown. We were on a Zoom call one day, and Dave noticed some beer books behind me on a bookshelf, and we got talking, and then he said, "I'd love to do a craft beer podcast." I said, wow, I like the sound of my own voice quite a lot. And I'm a bit of a frustrated wannabe local radio DJ. Let's do a podcast. And we started a podcast, and that was nearly 5 years ago now, and we're still here.
I think it's really boring, but it's one of the happiest accidents that you love the editing side of things and are really into all that, because so many podcasts, I think, survive or die by actually how well we're put together. And obviously in COVID, everyone had a go at it, didn't they, pretty much? Everyone tried doing a podcast. And I remember when we were getting started, we were listening to some other people's, and it was just like, well, the sound quality's not good. It's just essentially your way of recording, having a few beers with your mates, which is nothing wrong with, but probably other people don't need to hear that. So we sort of went for more of I think we've always said it's more of a magazine style, isn't it? That's what we've sort of gone for.
Yeah, we like to have different features rather than just, get the two of us together and get slowly tanked up. That's nice for the people involved, but I'm never sure your listeners want to hear that. So we try to have different features, and we record them all at different times, so you can never actually tell if we are inebriated, and then we beat them all together. Although saying that, going back to our first episode in lockdown, we did used to do it in one hit because we had more time then.
Yeah, we were sort of starting at we'd start about 8-ish, wouldn't we? We wouldn't finish till 2 in the morning. Sometimes.
Oh yeah, we'd be sitting there for hours.
We'd finish and then be like, well, we haven't got to get up for anything tomorrow apart from work, and that doesn't start for a few hours. Should we get another beer from the garage? Should we get another beer from the garage? And,
Happy days.
We did stop recording, but
Yeah, lockdown was wild when you think back to it. Like, I can remember just midday cracking open a can of pills and just being like, yep, this is fine. This is great. Like, I bloody loved it.
Anything
it was also anything went. The weather was absolutely incredible, which lent itself to it, didn't it? All of a sudden, people sat in their gardens in, well, it was this time 5 years ago, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and the weather was absolutely stunning. I remember sitting in the garden a lot during lockdown, as a lot of people did, and I think for me, it also accelerated. Obviously at the start of the podcast, but it accelerated my beer buying habits because we quickly found out that all the brewers could obviously still keep chucking stuff out in cans. And Dave and I were just like, it was ridiculous really, wasn't it, Dave? Like, you weren't spending your money on anything else. So it was like every day it felt like there'd be an order turning up from somewhere.
I do remember on one occasion, I think there was about 5 deliveries turned up. UPS would roll up in the van and there'd be a beer delivery, then APC, then the Royal Mail, then, Every or Hermes or whatever it was called then, one after the other. I mean, the neighbours must have thought we were just become alcoholics overnight, which is quite
Guilty
interesting.
of that one.
Obviously, all of this segues quite nicely into your story and what you do.
Yeah, well, my alcoholism really, it was similar to yours. Not your alcoholism, of course. It was my story, I should say. God, this isn't an intervention, I promise. My story is similar to yours in terms of lockdown. I got really into craft beer during lockdown because I had people in who were staying in the house with me, but were really into craft beer. And all of a sudden it was like, what's this 11% nitro stout? I really like that. And I'm going to drink a lot of those because I was used to drinking lager. And that's when my issue really became apparent, when it was like, oh, okay, this level of drunk is horrific, like bad. This is when the nasty things happen. So yeah, lockdown really accelerated that for me. And then obviously post-lockdown, the world opened up again. I'd go out and just try to drink like I used to drink when I was just drinking like sessionable lagers.
So what do you think it is then that made you go sort of all in and want more and more and more? Whereas somehow we managed, I think we drew the line and said, enough is enough. It's so strange, isn't it, how you your road went different to ours?
Yeah, like I've spent years trying to figure out what alcoholism is just in my own brain without doing any proper research into it, to be honest. But I spent years thinking, right, I wish I'd have known what drink it was that made me an alcoholic. At what point could I have reversed it? And I've kind of just come to accept that, being an alcoholic, it was always within me. It's always something that I had the potential to fall into. I look at how when I was a child, I got really addicted to Tribor extra strong mints. Like I'd get through a pack of them a day at one point, or I'd have little compulsions and I'd obsess over things and I'd get really into it. So I think when you give me a substance like alcohol that is incredible, I love it. It's great. Ethanol is fabulous. 2 pints deep is just the best. And if I'm miserable at the time, which I was, like utterly miserable, that becomes a bit of a release, and then a bad habit starts to form. And I think it was always going to happen at some point in my life. It's just the cards that were on the table were presented in a way that was like, right, now go time.
Lockdown was almost the catalyst for it.
Yeah, definitely. Because I hear you guys talking about your like ordering of beers during lockdown, and my first question was in my head was, how do you begin to moderate that if you've got beer just arriving by the day? Like, I can't understand how someone didn't drink it all in one night, because I know I would have done.
How do we know that this is I don't know the answer to this, and maybe you do, I don't. How do we know, or anybody else know, that we're not alcoholics? We love a drink, don't we, Dave? We love a drink. I'm drinking a beer now.
Yeah, I'm not because I'm ill, but I've always had it in my head, probably right from the start, because I've always had it in the back of my mind. Well, not always in the back of my mind, but I've had it in the back of my mind from time to time thinking, cool, you're drinking a bit too much, you should probably ease up. And the test has always been in my head, rightly or wrongly. Like, if I don't have any today, do I miss it? And is it, am I getting to a point of a day and I'm like, oh my God, I really need a beer, just like I need an excuse to have a beer. And as long as I can sort of do that, I figure I'm okay, because I can always say, no, I don't want to drink today, and it's not a problem. That's sort of my method.
Yeah, for me, I think it's like, if alcohol is having a negative impact on your life and yet you continue to consume it, I think that's when it becomes an issue. Like when you're you could be grey area drinking for a while. So with myself, I could go a few days without it. I didn't feel like I needed it all the time. I didn't wake up and think, oh can I get a beer in? For me, it would be, I couldn't go for a pint. I could never go for a pint, because what's the point? Why would anyone have a pint? I need at least 5. Otherwise, why am I? And then if someone says, "Oh no, I don't fancy 5," and it's like, well, you've mentioned going for a beer now, so I'm going to do that on my own, because that seed is there now. And I knew that my drinking was affecting people around me, and yet I continued doing it. It was at that point where I was like, okay, this substance is having a negative impact on my life and on other people's lives. That's it's like, right, like alcoholism is a problem with drinking. So when drinking becomes a problem, that's when it's alcoholism. That's kind of where I draw the line. There's probably a medical, like, if you're drinking what there definitely is, if you're drinking a certain amount of units in a week, then it's alcoholism. But I'm concerned with that. But also I smash about 7 alcohol-free beers a night. So I'm not the guy to talk to about, like, healthy living. I'm about, like, okay, how does this affect you and your relationships with yourself and with others?
So if you sort of chain drink a load of alcohol-free beers, is there any negative side to that?
Acid reflux, I have noticed recently with sours. Obviously, some of them are like, you've got a lot of sugar in some of it.
Yeah.
So that's not ideal. But other than that, like, it's, don't replace it with water. That's probably not wise. But in terms of like an ABV, like, it's scientifically impossible for a 0.5 to do anything to you.
So do you, when you're drinking an alcohol-free beer, do you get the same buzz that you used to get from a beer with alcohol?
I think for me, it's kind of like, you get like the social buzz of drinking a beer. And I think in a certain setting, like in a social setting, you definitely do get that with alcohol-free, or I definitely do. I think a lot of that is placebo. Like your brain, when you drink beer, it expects to feel good. It expects that dopamine release, which happens when you consume ethanol. So even just the weight of a pint in your hand, you're anticipating pleasure. And it's like, oh, this is nice. And over time, that does fade a little bit. Like, I don't get the kind of 2-pint buzz anymore with alcohol-free beer. But early on, I can remember my first pint of Lucky Saint on tap. And I was walking back to my car after I had like 4 pints. I was walking back to my car and my legs felt a bit jelly. I was like, what? This is weird. Like, am I okay to do this? It's like, yeah, of course you are. Like, it's fine. Like, you're definitely fine to do this. But the brain is a very powerful thing. And I think placebo is a massive part of it, which is, I think, what's so important about alcohol-free beer. It's just, like, it's the placebo.
It's interesting, actually, because there's more and more lower ABV beers around these days, a lot of table beers, that sort of stuff. And me and Dave have got into these quite a lot, haven't we? We really enjoy one. But, some of these are as low as sort of 1.82%. But I don't feel as if I have one of those, I don't feel like it's not a real beer. It's still a beer. So presumably if it's a 0.5, it's still a beer to you.
Yeah, like, I mean, when you see how it's made, like I've been lucky enough to go to a few breweries and see like the process of it, and it's like actually it's made in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Like it's still brewed, it's still got all the ingredients. You're just doing something with the alcohol. You're removing the alcohol, and there's various methods to do that. There is a form of alcohol-free beer that this is where we get into like grey area where you skip fermentation completely.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, oh, okay, where is this beer? Like, can I call this a beer? And to me, maybe not. But once fermentation has begun, and you've got water, hops, yeast, and what they do, like that's beer. Like, interestingly, I've been looking into the history of alcohol-free beer recently, just being a bit of a loser. And it's like you go back to like the very start of beer, like ancient Egyptians, and obviously we don't know how this stuff was made because the recipe predates written language. But there's reports suggesting that a lot of it would have been alcohol-free, or at least like 1%, 2%. And that's like, what?
Wow.
This is mad. Like, it's got a lot of history to it. And you go into Prohibition when 0.5 became the legal percentage of ABV that could be in a alcohol-free drink, which is wild that that's the standard that we still just have, and we kind of sit with it. And it's like, oh, it worked in Prohibition America, so let's just keep with that. And it's got a really like rich history. The problem is a lot of it was just not very good until now. So we talk, lockdown, and suddenly it felt like the rise of alcohol-free beer.
Yeah.
Certainly when I got sober, like a year after lockdown, 2022, I think. God, that's bad of me. Yeah, it was 2022 when I got sober. And since then, it's just been like, what? This is all of these amazing liquids. And you guys, I mean, you do a beer podcast, a full-fat beer, shall we call it, podcast. And for you guys to reach out to me and invite me to come on and chat about it, it's moments like that that make you go, right, okay, this is credible. This is good.
As much as we might like talking about an 8% double IPA, we'll happily talk about a 0.5% alcohol-free beer because essentially they're all beers.
They are, and I think as well, you say there's 2022 is when you started to find that there was this sort of rush of alcohol-free beer. Now, you would be looking for it a bit more at that point than Dave and I would. I would say, as you say, we do a full-fat beer show, but it feels like probably in the last, certainly 2024 and maybe the second half of 2023 to like, if you're not looking for it, you don't have a choice. It's being put in front of you now. Like now alcohol-free beer is everywhere. And like, that's the thing that all the breweries have to carry as, as part of their core range. Pretty much they're going to have an alcohol-free offering or a low alcohol-free or a low alcohol offering.
Yeah, I feel like 2024, like the second half of 2024 is like the period of time in which UK craft breweries absolutely nailed like hazy pales and hazy IPAs. I don't think there's anything more to be done in that category now. Like, I've had some Cloudwater ones recently, and like Northern Monk and Dare and We Can Be Friends, and it's all just like, right, it's bad news for me because I'm running out of things to say about them. Well, it's just like, this is really good. And so is this.
Say, where do you go next then? Where does the alcohol-free world go next?
No, I'm sure that would be, this is my little recurring joke, because apparently that would be pretty scientifically impossible to get a cask alcohol-free beer because of oxygen, or I'm not clever enough to know. But on a serious note, I think we need to start cracking like milds and bitters and like English ales and things like that. We've seen Proper Job, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I've heard a few people say, I know you said how good it was when you talked to us before, and I've heard other people say that, yeah.
It is, that beer for me was, I didn't think it was going to be that good. I'll be honest. I saw it, and it was at the Guild Awards evening. The first time I'd ever seen it, I hadn't even heard that it was coming, which is terrible of me because I'm normally quite on the ball with things like that. But I think I'd kind of given up on breweries like that because I'd been waiting for so long and it just hadn't happened. And it was like, okay.
it must be really refreshing and sort of validating for you to see these massive beers that everybody knows, like Proper Job, suddenly having alcohol-free versions. It must like you when there's no alcohol-free option of a certain beer, you must feel sort of excluded from the club almost. But when they do a 0% or a 0.5% version, all of a sudden the doors are open to you now drinking it.
Yeah, like it's when you see beers like that, you go, I can be like Thornbridge and Jaipur. That was like Jaipur was probably the first. It was Jaipur, Sierra Nevada, first two craft beers that I drank, and they were the first two beers that I drank that made me go, I like beer. I don't just like Budweiser or Grolsch. Like that, they were my coming of age beers. So to see Jaipur, that was like, this is amazing. And then there was a Cloudwater Juice Forsyth that came in January this year, and that was amazing. The kind of what we're dealing with now is that these beers come and then they're limited edition, small batch brews, and then they go away. I think having more like core range beers, like if breweries can replicate their signature brews, so like imagine a steady rolling alcohol free, like it would be that's the world I want to live in. I think it's going to be very difficult because you guys that mentioned, you guys that mentioned Track and Sonoma. What's the bloody name of it?
Yeah, Sonoma.
That's the one. But they released that alcohol free, and it didn't tend to get that good kind of a good reception from a lot of beer people. I'd never tried the full alc version, so I had nothing to compare it to. But I think the people that are drinking both are going to make those comparisons, and more often than not, there's going to be a bit of a difference. But yeah, I mean, what did you try the alcohol free, or what did you make of it comparatively?
It's an interesting question because we don't drink a lot of alcohol free stuff. This issue came up just recently because we bought Cloudwater's 10th birthday beers, didn't we, Dave? To talk about on the podcast. And they did 6 beers, right? 5 beers, full fat alcohol beers, if you want, and an alcohol free version. Now, I bought the alcohol free one as well because I wanted the full, geeky me wanted the full collection of 6, obviously. Dave didn't get the alcohol free one, did you? But there was a reason for this, Dave. So tell everybody about why.
So my theory, rightly or wrongly, on it was, I think I remember seeing whatever the price of the box was for 5, and then what the price of the box was for the 6, and I didn't feel that the alcohol-free beer offered good enough value to justify me spending the money on it. And the other part of me thought, if I get it, am I actually going to drink it? And probably the likelihood would be no. So I'm essentially paying for something that I won't drink, so I left it alone. But I think the cost was the driving factor. When we did our interview, I had Beak's beer, and I don't quite know how much I paid for it because it was part of a job lot. However, I don't think it was that much at all. And when I had it, I didn't feel like I was having, a cheap beer or sort of something rushed. It felt like it was worth the price tag I'd paid for it. And that's not to say the Cloudwaters wouldn't have been the same, but because craft beer is by its nature pretty expensive, it doesn't take much to suddenly be, £50-60 in on an order. I'm very much always trying to look for, I really want this. I'm not just going to order it for the sake of it. In lockdown, it was ordering for the sake of it. Now, I don't drink as much as I used to. So I want to make sure what I'm getting I really enjoy. So that was my sort of driving factor for it.
But it sparks a bit of a debate about whether there is value to be. Where is the value in alcohol-free beer, monetary-wise? What if you pay £3 a can, or £5 a can, or £6 a can, do you get a different quality product for your different amount of money? If you spend a tenner on a can of full-fat beer, you expect it to be like a premium product. But if you spend a tenner on an alcohol-free can of beer, what extra do you get for spending more?
Yeah, I suppose it's like, it depends on where you're buying from. So, like, if you're buying independent, you're going to pay an independent price, which is, that's just, I think we've been conditioned to expect that. It's like if you buy although it's not independent, but you buy like a Fentimans Cola or you buy a Pepsi. You know, you look at the two and it's like, okay, this is bespoke and this is
That's a good point.
like mass produced. But then it's what value do we kind of put to alcohol? So, like, if I'm paying a tenner for a beer, I want it to be like, I want to be able to drink one of them and it's done the job. If I'm paying, like, would I pay £10 for, I mean, I would pay £10 for an alcohol-free beer just to say I'd done it.
You know,
Would I expect anyone else to? Probably not.
If Mashgang did some special small batch release and it was 12 quid a can, you'd be, even though it's £12, you would be all over it.
Yeah, I'd probably go up to 25 for a single can. But that's part of, like, the collectability of it for me. Like you were saying, Dave, about you're spending money on the things that you want and you're being very considerate with your choices. I think for me, the difference in me going and like I've got really into European beers lately, and once every few months I'll do a big order from a company called ONP5 or Under 0.5. They're based in the Netherlands. They do fantastic alcohol-free exclusive beers from all over Europe. Once every 3 months, I'll go and spend a couple of £100 over there and get all of these incredible beers that I then have to go and do my research into because the cans are all in Dutch or in Czech. And for me, that's kind of the collectability of it, and it's the experience of it. I think you pay for the experience.
Yeah, that translates still very much to what Dave and I do. You know, we've got, fingers crossed, in the future we're going to have a chat to someone from America, which is a little bit unusual. And they've got a load of their beers. They've obviously sent some pallets over because they're available on the bottle shops, and we were talking about it. Now, Dave isn't as worried about them as a brewery. Like, you've not had them before. You said you'd sort of pick up a couple. I'm a big fan, and I'm sort of weighing up, well, yeah, I could get a load, and do I just bite the bullet and think, rather than getting maybe 15 beers for 60, 70 quid, I'm going to get 7 or 8, because they're all going to come in at £8 to £10. But I'm getting something different to the normal, and it's that collecting bit, like you say, it's that check-in, it's getting something that not everyone else has had and trying it. And yeah, so I think that translates to alcohol-free and alcohol itself.
Yeah, I think that is like where the two are quite comparable. But I think that's awesome. Like when you see people, there's more and more people now that are getting really into the collectability of the alcohol-free stuff, and that's when I kind of go, all right, I can see that people are, like I say, people are taking it seriously, which is as endearing as seeing like good beer in a bottle shop or in a supermarket, is when full fat beer folks are going, here's an alcohol-free beer, this is good. It's like, oh, nice, this is really lovely.
Here's a question for you. You know, previously you'd wake up the next day after quite a few beers during lockdown and you might feel a bit ropey. What is it like now to wake up the next day after 4, 5, 6 alcohol-free beers and just feel fine? What does that feel like?
The weirdest part is like the faux hangovers. Yesterday I felt hungover all day. And it's because I stayed up until like 3 a.m. playing PlayStation and doing some writing. And I went to bed really late and then tried to wake up early. And actually, I was just exhausted. But you know, like when your head feels full of sawdust, you just feel like you're really dry and horrible. And there was almost an anxiety that kicked in with that.
Okay.
Because it was like, oh, this is a hangover. This is how that felt. And it's like, oh, I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. But in terms of like day-to-day living, it's really nice just being able to wake up and feel like shit, because I always feel like shit when I wake up. But then you have a glass of water and you go, oh, this isn't all day. That's nice. That's really nice. Like, I can't even imagine dealing with a hangover now. Like, I mean, my hangover cure used to be 2 bottles of Creek Boon. Like, but that would sort me right out. But yeah, hangovers. I mean, how are they now? Do they still suck?
I mean, try to moderate the drinking so I don't get them, but I do still get them. It's usually sort of a dull headache for me, to be honest. But it can link. I think the older you get, the more it lingers the next day.
Do you know what I used to hate? Like the sneak hangovers when I had 3 pints.
Yes, that is annoying, isn't it?
You feel robbed.
Yeah.
So why has this happened? 3 pints of, like, let's say Heineken.
Yeah.
Like, literally the tamest thing. I didn't even take any drugs. I just had 3 pints of Heineken and I feel awful. What's this about? That was, I felt utterly robbed by that.
Do you feel healthier in yourself for not having alcohol in your system anymore?
Yes, mainly when I look at old photos of myself. Like, my skin is a lot better. Like, I had, like, it wasn't like a wart, but, well, it kind of was, like, on my nose and on my lip for about a year. And I just thought that was just me. I thought that it was just, this is just an unfortunate skin condition I've developed. But they've gone. Like, they went 6 months after I stopped drinking. I stopped smoking cigarettes as well, so no nicotine stains on my fingers. In terms of, like, physical health, I notice it if I'm walking up a hill, that I don't feel like I'm going to pass out anymore. I can walk up a hill. In terms of mental clarity, yeah. Like, I think back to some times when I was drunk and just screaming down the end of a phone at somebody, or telling all of my mates to, like, get the fuck off me, leave me the fuck alone. And like, that still, like, gives me, like, such a horrible sense of dread, because it's really weird, like, remembering that guy and then thinking that I was that guy. Like, that is the like, a lot of people say, like, drunk man's thoughts are sober man's, or drunk man's words are sober man's thoughts. I think 90% of the time that is complete bullshit, because some of the stuff that I said then, I know was just me trying to be as nasty as I physically could because I was so miserable, and I regretted it all then. And God, I mean, now, do I regret it? I'm not sure, because would I be here now if all of it hadn't have happened?
So the way I see this is that you're sort of mentally also in a much better place than you were, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Playing devil's advocate here, if you had a full fat beer now, what would happen?
So this is how I know I'm an alcoholic, because I can 100% promise you I would be fine. Like, you see what I'm saying? I'm like, yeah, it would be fine. And the fact that I'm saying that, and the fact that and I'm convinced I'd be fine. I could definitely have a beer. But then the fact that I'm telling you that is just like, right, I am bullshitting myself, aren't I? But also, it's kind of, if alcohol-free beer was still Beck's Blue and Kaliber, and even Lucky Saint, which is fantastic, but if it was only Lucky Saint, same beer forever, it would be a lot harder.
Yeah, what you do have now is an ever-changing array of different alcohol-free beers coming out to sort of satisfy that collecting nature that we all have.
That's the thing. And, like, I can have, you talked about Hell's beers. I had a fantastic, like, Augustina Hell's not long ago. It was like, what are you doing? Alcohol-free? Like, hello.
I saw
it was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was brilliant. So I still enjoy beer. And in fact, I enjoy beer more now than I did when I was drinking the alcoholic stuff. I would have loved to have gotten into beer and not been an alcoholic, because there'd be even more to try, you know. But I'd like to think that I'd be dipping my toe in both, like, parts of the spectrum now. Obviously, I can't, because I'm an alcoholic. But no, I do think I would probably be fine. I know what life can be like with alcohol in it for me. I never want to risk that again.
So what do sort of friends and family think of you drinking alcohol-free beers? Do they sort of think, what's going on here? He's got a problem with alcohol, but he's still drinking all these beers. Are they suspicious of it? What does everybody think?
The only person that ever put me off it, or that ever tried to say, no, this is bad, this is bad for you, was an ex-partner of mine. That was inevitably the person that I was with last before I got sober, and that all ended in fire. But she was really against alcohol-free beer, which I'd had it in my head for maybe 6 months before I stopped drinking that alcohol-free beer was going to be what I'd use, but I just wasn't ready. Like, I hated it. I'll be honest, like even Freedom, which I'll buy quite regularly now, Lucky Saint didn't quite cut it. But that was, the last 6 months, it was like, I think when I was trying to kind of get off booze, that's when it really, like,
sunk its claws in. That's when my addiction went, no, you're here. You're coming with me now. Like, it was like a gradual creeping in, and then it was suddenly like, no, now it's really bad for the last 3 months, 6 months. But yeah, she was the only person that has ever been negative about it. Early days, my mom wasn't sure if I should be drinking 0.5% beers because she didn't know about the ABV, all of this business. You see 0.5%, you think it's got alcohol in it. In fact, I thought that it was, it's ridiculous. I thought that it was helping my withdrawal, a 0.5% beer because of the alcohol, which is complete bollocks now. But again, placebo.
Well, mentally it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, massively. And it's mad how I'd stop shaking after one. But I mean, a lot of that is sugar and all of this business as well. But my friends as a whole are very supportive, and they're very into it, into what I'm doing, and they like that if I happen to order like a pallet of beers, they normally get some, and they're quite into that. And they, it's weird to see their drinking habits change as well, because they weren't ever really big drinkers, but we'd enjoy ourselves. But now quite often they'll order an alcohol-free, and I don't know if that's just there's still something in the back of their brain that's saying, oh, it's bad for me to drink around Ben, or if it's genuinely they're saying, oh, now we've stepped into this world, this stuff's quite good to drink actually, and I'm going to have that because I like it.
I think there's no doubt whatsoever that the quality has improved massively, and like you said, Dave, in the last 12 to 18 months, hugely. You can have an alcohol-free beer now from one of the craft breweries that we feature on the podcast, and you don't even know it's alcohol-free. It tastes like proper beer.
What was on that? What do you think for you guys was the first alcohol-free beer that you had that made you go,
Oh,
okay, that's not bad? Like, was the one in particular, or was it just, did it just kind of over time go, I can't remember the last time I had a bad alcohol-free beer? Was it more of that sort of thing?
I wouldn't have had probably enough of them to sort of be able to say bad, good. Although that might change, because you mentioned earlier on about acid reflux, and I've been suffering with that over the last few weeks, which I think hopefully is related to just me being constantly ill at the moment. But anyway, the first alcohol-free beer I really remember being okay, and probably now, if I had it again, I wouldn't be as impressed, was Adnams Ghost Ship.
Okay.
I had a lot of people were saying, oh, this is really good, and I remember what was I doing? Oh, that's right, I was playing darts, and I was driver that night, and I had it then, and I thought, yeah, okay, this isn't actually that bad. But it was still, I remember having a couple of bottles of it, I could start to feel the sugar content in it.
Yeah, a bit of malt, bit of the old synthetic caramel. Pet peeve with drinks like that. It's like, this is fake sugar.
Yeah, I am really not sure of the answer to that question, but what I do know is that more and more, I mentioned it before, we've had table beers, and I had one recently that was branded a micro pale, which was 1.8%.
Okay.
And which is pretty much, it's nearly alcohol-free, isn't it? Like much alcohol as a ripe banana or whatever. But I drink beers like that and think, yeah, this is good. I really enjoy this. The fact that it is very little alcohol really doesn't matter. And I've mentioned this quite a lot on our podcast. I don't drink. My motivation for drinking is because I want to have a nice beer, not I want to get absolutely smashed and feel terrible the next day. In fact, I don't want to do any of those things. I just want some nice beers on a night time and go to bed and wake up feeling good, Yeah,
it's become like almost an accidental slogan of mine is that if you like beer and you don't like alcohol-free beer, then it's not beer that you like, it's alcohol that you like.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I said it on a random episode on the first season of the podcast, and the amount of people that came back and said, yeah, that really resonated. And it was like, oh, okay. And it just makes, because the flavour now is it's just there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say if you don't like, if you like beer but you don't like Heineken 0%, then you're absolutely right. That's a fair comment. Like, I will defend alcohol-free beer. Like, I will die on that hill with the flag waving high, but I won't defend all of it.
No.
Like, some of it to this day is dreadful.
Yeah. Much the same as it is within, alcohol beer. For every good beer, there is an average beer, there is a bad beer. That is just the nature of the industry.
Does Kaliber and that sort of stuff still exist? Is that still around these days?
I've tried to find Kaliber, and no, you can't get it anymore.
What was the other one around that sort of time? There was Kaliber, and
Would it have
I
been?
was feeling it began with the Bavaria. Or
Oh, Bavaria. Yeah, Bavaria still exists.
Does it?
And Bavaria exists, and it's in like the Heineken kind of category.
Okay.
Also, Klosthaler,
Okay.
Germany. They've got a few different brews, and some of them are okay. But they were like, I think around the 70s, those kind of breweries started doing stuff.
Yeah, I sort of remember them from my sort of childhood, early mid 80s. Not that I was drinking them, but sort of seeing other family members drinking them.
Kaliber, I would love to get a bottle. I'd love to just have a bottle of it just for myself. Like, I mean, I wouldn't drink it because I don't know how all that stuff was made, and I don't know about like re-fermentation. Like, it could be that a bottle of Kaliber now is like 21%. That would be a really funny way to relapse, wouldn't it? On a really old bottle of Kaliber, like that would be a story. Yeah, but it's weird because Kaliber, like, brewed by Guinness, and you look at Guinness now, and it's like that's the drink for everybody.
Well, Guinness asks. The whole Guinness thing has gone completely mental in recent months, in fact, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I was in a farm shop last weekend, right, and they'd got Guinness cheesecake. They'd got Guinness sausages. Everything is Guinness mad at the moment. I suppose St. Patrick's Day and whatever, but generally, the Guinness bandwagon is fully flowing, isn't it? Everybody's talking about Guinness.
This podcast, I think I've mentioned Guinness on pretty much every episode, because as we mentioned at the start, although this is the first episode to go out, we've been very poorly collectively. So it's one of the last to record, and every time I've gone in, I've said to myself, "Don't talk about Guinness again."
But it's hard not to.
You kind of have to, and I think we want, as a country and as a people, I think we want to feel a little bit of like tradition again. And I don't mean that in like I voted Brexit out means out, I'm a ham hock sort of way. I mean, like, I think we want to feel like a little bit of connection to history and just feel like okay again. And I think brands like Guinness that you know and you love and you trust, it kind of represents that. And I think people are really like latching on to that, which is why I say I think like some English ales and some milds and things, I'd love to see those crop up.
And also the whole Guinness Zero thing, if you're standing in a pub with a pint of Guinness Zero next to somebody with a pint of Guinness, nobody knows who's got what. You're all in the same club, you're drinking Guinness.
The worst thing that I think breweries have done is release themed alcohol-free glasses.
Glasses, yeah.
Like, I'm a bit backwards here, like, although I am Mr. Alcohol-free, and like that's kind of what I base my whole life on. I want my alcohol-free beer in just a normal beer glass.
You don't want to advertise it to everybody.
I don't want the blue label glass that says zero on it.
Yeah.
Like, it's great that they're putting a lot of money into it, and they want to promote it, and they want to talk about it, and they want to normalise it. Like, I love that. But in a pub,
the minute you give an alcoholic a Guinness Zero in a Guinness Zero glass, you're branding that person an alcoholic effectively, aren't you?
Yeah. Like, where's my badge?
Look at him.
Yeah. Like, just, where's the spotlight? I'll go and stand under that, shall I? So, yeah, I mean, that's a tiny thing. Like, it's still better than the Coca-Cola glasses that I've been served, like, drinks in, and I've had some horrific glassware in pubs. So, that's me being very particular. But still, I don't like it. It's one thing I don't like about the progress.
Do you collect glassware in the same way that you collect beers?
I started to, and then I quickly had to rein it in because I stopped myself from buying like a set of beer glasses that was like almost £300 for like 6, and that's when I went no, like, this is stupid. You've got nice glasses. There's lots of charity shops that do like some nice glasses as well. But I think it's very easy for me to get really carried away with the world of beer now, because it's a world that I didn't ever think I'd be allowed in, or I'd be around. Like I got emotional the other day. Like a genuine tear left my eye because I poured up the most perfect Pilsner in like one of the nice thin, like European glasses, and I'd got the head absolutely spot on, and it just looked incredible. Like the glass was clean, there was nothing clinging to the side of it, and I just held it and looked at it, and I felt a single tear leave my eye, and I was like, "What? This is pathetic." But it's just magic. And I think it does go further than the liquid for me. It is, what does beer represent to you? And beer to me represents what it always has done. It's just, I can still do it, which is just fantastic.
I don't know about you, Dave, but I think it's amazing that you can not only talk so openly about your experiences, but also, you know, you've experienced the lows of alcohol beer, and you sort of pick yourself up, and now you're like one of the spokespeople for alcohol-free beers in this country. You really are.
I will take that and run with it. That's like, yeah, that's high praise.
Dave, what do you think? I'll make.
It was a bit of a selfish one, actually. I just thought what Ben was saying there about how there's so much and you get into it and you find out more and more is sort of what we've ended up doing, because our podcast was starting out like, you know, we wanted to drink beer and talk about it because we like talking about it. But I think increasingly now you listen to an episode, and I'd like to think we talk more to the people than we do the beer. And like we find out what the people who've brewed the beer, what their story is. And you find nine times out of 10, it's fascinating how people have ended up deciding they want to do this. Like we had a period for a while where it was, well, we started a brewery in lockdown, and actually we're probably moving past that a bit now. And it's people sort of almost wanting to give back to the community, or sort of they've always had this sort of dream and then they've just thought, let's go with it, or they want to do something sustainable for the environment and things like that. And it's just, it so to your point, it just shows how much there is to it than just the drink in your glass.
Yeah, it's not just that liquid, is it? There's so much more to it.
Yeah, it's you're right. There is so much to that, like that liquid that ends up in your glass and then getting drunk. And it's like the people in beer and the history of beer and the traditions around it, and like the coming together of people for beer. Like that is it's a universal language, like the coming together of people over beer. Like I can't think of much in the world that is that like community focused.
It is interesting how you say you got emotional over pouring that glass of beer, because I completely get that. I really do. It can be quite emotional sometimes, the connections you make to people as well in this industry. You know, I've met so many people that I would never have met otherwise, and some of them have become really good friends, you know. And yeah, it's a very inclusive industry, you know, I think.
Yeah, it's when for me, in that moment, I looked at it, and what entered my brain initially was, this is perfection. Like, this liquid in this glass is perfection. And then I thought, like, it was like life flashing before your eyes kind of moment. This is ridiculous, isn't it, by the way? We're just talking about a fucking glass. Like, right here, it was here. Like, it was basically just this.
Did you take a picture of it? Did you take a picture of it?
I did, and it looked shit. It did not, like, do it justice at all. But in that split...
But you will always have that moment.
I'll always have that moment, and no one will take that away from me. And it was real, and no one can tell me otherwise. But it was just in that second, or in that split second, it was like, I'm here now because of alcohol-free beer.
Yeah.
And it was like, fuck. Like, yeah.
It's worth saying as well that since we spoke on an episode of our podcast, we've come back to you and said we want you to come on future episodes every couple of months, every 3 months, whatever, and just give a little lowdown on the alcohol-free scene, because we feel it's a part of the industry that is really important, and there's not that many people shining a light on it. So we want to do that, and you'll be coming on those episodes to tell people about what's going on.
Yeah, again, when you asked me that was one of those, like, run downstairs and tell my girlfriend, like, oh, they've asked me to do this. This is a mate. Because every time somebody asks me to do something with an alcohol-free beer, it's like, that's really cool. Yeah, of course. Like, that's fantastic. But every time somebody that is primarily in the full alc world asked me to come and, have a chat about what I'm doing and what's kind of on my little side of the fence, that means so much more, because it's what I wanted when I started to do this, was to show people, not that they should be drinking alcohol-free beer exclusively, but just to show people what existed. It's like, oh, here's this. Would you like to try it? Because it's here, and you can have it whenever you want. So to have even achieved that, be like asked to come and have a little chat with you guys every now and again, that's like, right, job done.
I think increasingly you're going to see the lines are going to blur more and more. I think it's only moving one way. There's not suddenly going to be I think I said this when we chatted before, there's not going to be some pushback and all of a sudden it's going to be 8% or nothing. Like, this is here to stay now. There's enough articles saying that the generation coming through starting to drink at the moment, aren't interested in drinking with the same habits that the generations have gone before now. That's not to say that the ones coming up behind them in 10, 15 years' time are going to follow suit, and it could go back a bit, I suppose. I think certainly alcohol-free is here now, and it's just, hopefully, much like craft beer, it should just continue to get better and better.
Yeah, that was kind of, I was going to kind of let you go by asking this question: is where would you both like to see alcohol-free beer head in the next couple of years as, drinkers of both liquids, like full fat and possibly alcohol-free? What would you like to see happen, or what would turn your head now enough to make you go, right, that's a big deal?
For all we've talked about alcohol-free beers, I think there probably is still a bit of a stigma attached to them at the moment. I think it's becoming less and less as time goes on. And I would like to see that disappear completely, so that, if I go to the bar and I'm ordering an alcohol-free beer and the guy next to me is ordering a tipper, he doesn't think there's something wrong with me for ordering the alcohol-free beer, I'd like there to be no disparity between different, because it's all beer, it's all the same liquid.
I think I'd like to get to a point where if I go into a bar, there might be, let's say there's 6 or 8 taps on, and half or half is alcohol and half is alcohol-free, and I will be genuinely, not torn, but will genuinely weigh up, what do I fancy drinking? Not just naturally gravitating towards the alcohol beer rather than the alcohol-free. I might have an alcohol-free towards the end when I feel I've had enough alcohol. I want it to become front and centre of my habits, potentially. So I sort of think, I know if I have this, it's going to be just as good as having the alcohol beer. Doesn't matter if there's no alcohol in it, just enjoy the taste type thing. That's where I'd like to see it get to.
Yeah, I think it's getting it to a point where alcohol-free beer becomes like an option rather than a choice that has to be made. So like you say at the bar, people will assume like, oh, are you driving, or are you on medication, or are you an alcoholic? And as you say, like towards the end of the night, you don't want alcohol anymore. So you'll kind of not reluctantly go for an alcohol-free beer, but it's there out of convenience rather than out of, no, I'm going to choose that because it's good. I think we will get there over time.
And also, as far as our podcast goes, it would be lovely a couple of years down the line, maybe, that alcohol-free beers get talked about on the different sections of our podcast because they're good beers, not because they're alcohol-free beers.
Not because they exist.
Not because they're there, but because they are genuinely good beers that we can talk about and that we want to champion.
Like if it was putty comes out and you get the alcohol-free putty and you go, cool, this year's alcohol-free putty is really good.
Alcohol-free chubbles from Cloudwater, imagine that. Maybe it'll happen.
Yeah, it's a world that I want to see. Well, because otherwise I can't have anything. But, but for the wider world, I'd like to see it, because I think if the last 3 years are anything to go by, and I always say the last 3 years because I don't have a voice before then, because I wasn't involved at all, quite the opposite. But if the next 3 years are anything like the last 3 years, then, I mean, who knows, maybe alcohol-free on cask is a possibility. But I think certainly getting some of these real highbrow beers coming to market, I think, is a possibility. And I'll look forward to chatting to you guys about them when they do. And thank you both so much for coming to do this. I think it's been worth the wait for me just to hear your lovely voices again, to be honest.
Sorry you had to wait so long.
Yeah, thank you for having us on.
And for any future kind of ramblings that we may we might make. It will, of course, be on the Daft About Craft podcast, kind of every whenever we feel like it, to be honest. But it's I'm looking forward to.
When you've got something to say, you can come on and say it.
Shit, every day, then. What have you done? What have you done, Dave and Dave? That's so great to say, because I said at the start my dad's name's Dave, so it's just nice to speak to a Dave. It makes me feel safe. Thank you, chaps, and I'll catch you very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Sober Boozers Club podcast. My name is Ben Gibbs. You can find me on all of the socials at Sober Boozers Club. For more information on the Daves, head over to Daft About Craft podcast on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts from. They're really excellent commentators on craft beer. I really enjoy talking to them, and I hope you enjoyed listening to them. For now, you guys take care, and I'll see you soon.